The rain had stopped an hour earlier, leaving the streets of San Mateo, California slick and reflective, like the city was still deciding what to remember. Inside a modern glass building near the bay, a conference room glowed white and quiet. The kind of quiet that made people lower their voices without being told. Ethan Caldwell stood at the head of the table, jacket draped over one chair, sleeves rolled with intention. He didn't look rushed. He didn't look uncertain. He looked like a man who believed momentum itself had chosen him. The screen behind him showed projected numbers climbing at a pleasing angle, blue lines cutting upward like proof. "This is the year," he said, tapping the table once lightly. "We stop playing catch-up and start setting the pace." A few nods followed, a few smiles. Phones were face down. When Ethan spoke, people listened, not because he demanded it, but because he had learned the rhythm of confidence early. Speak last. Speak clearly. Don't over-explain. When the meeting ended, the room emptied quickly. A couple of junior analysts lingered just long enough to thank him. One investor clapped him on the shoulder on the way out. "Big things," the man said. "You've built something serious." Ethan smiled, small and contained. "We're just getting started." He waited until the glass door closed before exhaling. Not relief, satisfaction. The kind that came from being seen exactly the way he wanted to be seen. On his phone, a calendar reminder pulsed once before disappearing. Wedding Malibu, 6 weeks. He didn't need the reminder, but he liked seeing it. It grounded him, reminded him of distance traveled. He picked up his jacket and headed out. Across town, in a quiet apartment complex tucked behind an older shopping strip, Lena Whitmore stood at her kitchen counter staring at a chipped mug she'd owned since college. The tea inside had gone cold, but she hadn't noticed. Her phone lay face down beside her keys, silent for a moment. The apartment was modest, clean, orderly, intentional. Nothing decorative without purpose. Nothing flashy. The kind of place people underestimated when they walked in. Lena didn't move when the phone vibrated. She waited for the second vibration. It came 3 seconds later. She turned the phone over. Unknown number. She considered letting it go to voicemail. She considered everything. Then she answered. "Yes." "Ms. Whitmore," a man said, calm and precise. "My name is Jonathan Hale. I'm calling from New York." There was a pause. Not on his end, on hers. She had learned long ago not to rush responses that mattered. "Go on," she said. "I represent the Whitmore Continental Trust. We've been trying to reach you." Her fingers tightened slightly around the phone. Not fear. Recognition. "I see," she said. "We need you to come in. In person." Another pause. The clock on the wall ticked, steady and indifferent. "My grandmother passed," Lena said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Jonathan replied. 3 weeks ago." Lena closed her eyes. Not in grief. She had done that part privately, but in acknowledgement. Some doors didn't open with noise. They opened because enough time had passed. "I can be in New York tomorrow," she said. "Good," Jonathan said. "There are documents we need to finalize." When the call ended, Lena set the phone down carefully, as if it might shatter if she moved too quickly. She looked around the kitchen. The same counter. The same mug. The same quiet. Nothing had changed. And yet everything had. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She reached into the back of a cupboard and pulled out a small metal box. Dull silver, edges worn smooth. It had lived there for years, untouched, waiting for the moment when waiting was no longer required. Ethan told people he and Lena had grown apart. He told others she had changed. To a few, he was more specific. "She let herself go," he said once, shrugging like it was an unfortunate fact, not a judgment. And she stopped fitting into the life I'm building. People nodded. They always did. It was easier to agree with a man on the rise and to question the story he told about the woman he left behind. The divorce had been efficient. Papers signed at a neutral office in Redwood City. No raised voices. No accusations. Ethan slid the documents across the table with professional courtesy. "I think this is best," he said, "for both of us." Lena read every page. Slowly, carefully, she signed where indicated. "You don't want anything?" Ethan asked, surprised despite himself. She shook her head. No. He had interpreted that as defeat, as acceptance, as proof he had been right to move on. He never asked why she didn't argue. The flight to New York was smooth. Lena sat by the window, hands folded, eyes open. She didn't watch movies. She didn't listen to music. She let the silence do its work. She remembered her grandmother's handwriting, tight, disciplined, deliberate, letters that arrived without apology, without warmth, without excess, instructions disguised as stories, warnings disguised as advice. Never let someone love your future more than your presence. Lena had kept every letter. She had never mentioned them to Ethan. He hadn't asked. In Manhattan, the offices of Whitmore Continental occupied the top floors of a building that didn't advertise its importance. No signage, no reception noise, just controlled space and people who moved with quiet certainty. Jonathan Hale met her at the elevator. He was older than she expected, posture straight, expression neutral. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, extending a hand. "Thank you for coming." She shook it once. "You said there were documents." "Yes," he said, "and explanations." They sat across from each other at a long table. Jonathan opened a folder. Inside were pages thick with ink and authority. "Your grandmother built a global infrastructure empire," he said. "Logistics, data routing, maritime coordination. She believed visibility was a liability." Lena listened. Her face didn't change. "She structured the trust with conditions," Jonathan continued. "No inheritance while married to someone who pursued status at the expense of stability. No inheritance while dependent on approval. Final transfer only after personal loss." He slid a page toward her. "The valuation stands at approximately $35 billion. The number existed in the air for a moment. Then Lena nodded once. "I assumed it would be more," she said quietly. Jonathan allowed himself the smallest smile. She would have appreciated that. Back in California, Ethan's life was accelerating. His firm was gaining traction. His name was circulating in rooms that mattered. And on his arm was Claire Morgan, polished, fit, effortless. She photographed well. She laughed easily. She matched the image. When they decided to marry, Ethan insisted on something specific. "I want Lena there," he said. Claire blinked. "Your ex-wife?" "Yes," he said. Closure. "It's mature." Claire hesitated, then smiled. "If you think it's important." The invitation was tasteful. Ivory cardstock, gold trim, Malibu coastline, private estate. It arrived in Lena's mailbox 3 days after she returned from New York. She stared at it for a long time. Then she said to the empty apartment, "All right."
She didn't buy a new dress. She chose a simple one. Clean lines. Neutral color. She didn't change her body. She didn't borrow jewelry. She didn't rehearse anything. When the day came, she drove herself down the coast, windows cracked, ocean air moving through the car. The estate sat high above the water, white stone against blue. As she stepped out, a few heads turned. Not because she demanded attention, but because presence has weight when it isn't trying to. Ethan saw her from across the lawn. His smile sharpened. "You came," he said, surprised and pleased. "I wasn't sure you would." "You invited me," Lena replied. He laughed lightly. Of course I did. Music drifted. Guests gathered. The ceremony was moments away. Then the world paused. A man in a dark suit walked toward the altar. He wasn't part of the wedding party. He wasn't holding champagne. He wasn't smiling. He stopped beside Lena. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, voice carrying without effort. "The board has arrived." Ethan frowned. "Excuse me." The man didn't look at him. Silence settled. And somewhere deep inside Ethan, something unfamiliar began to move. He just didn't know its name yet.
The man didn't belong there. That was the first thing Ethan Caldwell noticed. He wasn't dressed like a guest. No champagne glass. No smile. No confusion. He stood still beside Lena Whitmore like he had always known where to stand, like the wedding had simply been waiting for him to arrive. Ethan felt irritation before fear. "Excuse me," Ethan said, voice light but firm. "You're interrupting a private ceremony." The man didn't look at him. "My name is Jonathan Hale," he said calmly. "I represent the Whitmore Continental Trust." The name moved the crowd unevenly. Some people didn't react at all. Others stiffened immediately. A man in the front row stopped, adjusting his cufflinks. Someone near the back slowly lowered their phone. Ethan laughed once, short and dismissive. "There's been a mistake." Jonathan finally turned his head, just enough to acknowledge Ethan's existence. "There hasn't," he said. Then he looked back at Lena. "Ms. Whitmore," Jonathan said, respectful, measured. "The board has arrived. We're waiting on your confirmation." Ethan's smile faded. "What is this?" he asked, turning to Lena. "Did you plan something?" Lena met his eyes. Her voice was even. "No," she said. "I came because you invited me." That answer unsettled him more than anger would have. Jonathan opened a thin folder. "As of last night," he said, "the final conditions of the Whitmore Trust were satisfied. Full control has transferred." "To who?" Ethan asked too quickly. Jonathan didn't pause. "To Lena Whitmore." The silence that followed wasn't dramatic. It was confused. Heavy. Real. Ethan shook his head. "That's not possible." "She doesn't." He stopped, because he realized he didn't actually know what Lena had been doing for years. Jonathan continued. "The trust's current valuation stands at approximately $35 billion. The number didn't land like shock. It landed like gravity." Ethan stared at Lena. Not at her dress. Not at her body. At her face. As if it might explain how badly he had miscalculated. "You knew?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she said. His throat tightened. "Then why didn't you tell me?" Lena didn't answer immediately. She didn't rush to justify herself. "You never asked," she said. Ethan's phone vibrated in his hand. Then again, Claire, standing beside him, had gone very still. Jonathan spoke again. "For clarity," he said, "Whitmore Continental controls majority interest in several infrastructure pipelines supporting Mr. Caldwell's fund." Ethan's breath caught. "That's irrelevant." Jonathan looked at him calmly. "As of 9 minutes ago," he said, "those contracts were paused." Ethan's face drained of color. "That's not possible," he said. "Those agreements are locked." "They were," Jonathan replied. "They included control clauses. Clauses you benefited from while married to a Whitmore." Ethan felt something drop in his chest. "You lost them," Jonathan said, "when you divorced one." Ethan's phone rang. He answered without thinking. "What?" he snapped. Then his expression changed. "No," he said. "That can't be right." The call ended. Claire's phone vibrated. She glanced down, then looked back at Ethan, slowly. "You told me she was nothing," she said under her breath. Ethan didn't respond. Jonathan waited, then added one last sentence. "The trust also holds controlling interest in the building housing your firm's headquarters. The lease termination was delivered this morning." That was when Ethan broke. Not loudly, Not emotionally. He just stopped standing like a man who belonged in the room. Claire stepped away from him without saying a word. She slipped a ring from her finger and placed it on the table beside the guest book. She didn't look back. Ethan turned to Lena, voice unsteady. "You love me?" Lena looked at him one last time. "I loved who you pretended to be," she said. "You don't get to use that now." She turned and walked away. People moved aside without thinking, not because she demanded it, because power had finally revealed itself. Ethan sank into a chair, phone buzzing uselessly in his hand, watching the woman he once called fat and poor leave his life again, this time taking everything with her. And he still didn't understand the worst part yet. He would. The guests didn't know what to do with their bodies. Some stood, some sat back down. A few pretended to check their phones like nothing irreversible had just happened. Conversations didn't restart. They fractured, quiet, embarrassed fragments that never fully formed. Ethan Caldwell stayed seated, not because he wanted to, but because standing required belief, and belief had just left the room. His phone buzzed again. He didn't look at it this time. He already knew what it would say. Pause contracts. Delayed transfers. Let's circle back. The language of people leaving before you finish falling. Across the lawn, the officiant quietly closed his binder. No announcement. No apology. Just acceptance. Claire was gone. She hadn't made a scene. She hadn't argued. She hadn't cried. She had simply removed herself the moment she realized what Ethan actually was. That hurt more than the numbers. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped like he was waiting for instructions that would never come. Around him, guests began slipping away one by one, not rushing, not dramatic, just careful not to be associated with what was now clearly a mistake. Someone patted his shoulder in passing. Too lightly, too quickly. "Rough timing," the man murmured, already moving away. "Timing." Ethan almost laughed. At the edge of the estate, Lena stepped into the waiting black sedan. The door closed with a quiet finality that carried farther than shouting ever could. Inside, the car was cool and silent. Jonathan Hale sat across from her, posture unchanged. "It's emotion," he said. "Everything." Lena nodded once. She didn't ask for details. She didn't need them. Systems didn't require supervision once activated. As the car pulled away, she looked out at the ocean. The estate shrank behind them, white stone fading into distance. She felt nothing sharp, just light. A brief memory surfaced. Ethan years ago, standing in their old kitchen, telling her she was holding him back, telling her people noticed things, telling her she didn't belong beside who he was becoming. She had believed him then. Now she understood what he had mistaken. Power didn't announce itself. It waited. The car merged onto the highway, heading north. Back at the estate, Ethan finally checked his phone. 12 missed calls. 3 emails marked urgent. 1 message from a partner he trusted enough to tell the truth. "We need to talk." Today, Ethan stared at the screen, throat tight. For the first time, he realized something he had never allowed himself to consider. He hadn't been building something permanent. He had been borrowing credibility from people who no longer needed him. And once borrowed power is withdrawn, it doesn't argue. It disappears. Ethan closed his eyes. Somewhere ahead of Lena waited a life that no longer required her to prove anything. Somewhere behind her, Ethan Caldwell sat surrounded by guests who had already decided they would forget his name, and the distance between those two futures was widening fast. By the time Ethan Caldwell left the estate, the parking lot was half empty. Valets avoided eye contact. Staff moved with professional speed, already transitioning the space from celebration to cleanup. Chairs were being stacked, glasses cleared, evidence erased. The world had decided the moment was over. Ethan sat in his car for a full minute before turning the key. His hands shook, not violently, just enough to be noticeable. He hated that. He had always prided himself on control. His phone rang again. This time he answered. "Ethan," a man said, voice clipped, efficient. "We have a situation." Ethan stared straight ahead. "I'm aware." "No," the man replied. "You're not." Ethan swallowed. "Talk." The pause triggered automatic reviews. The man said, "Compliance flagged 3 accounts. 2 partners are distancing themselves already. Quietly." "How quietly?" Ethan asked. There was a pause on the line. Then, "Quiet enough that no one would offend you." The call ended. Ethan drove. The coastal road blurred past him, sunlight bouncing off the windshield like mockery. He tried to replay the moment again, the instant where things turned, where he might have said something different, done something smarter. There wasn't one. The collapse hadn't started at the wedding. It had started years earlier, the first time he chose optics over loyalty. By the time he reached his apartment in Palo Alto, his phone had gone silent. Silence used to mean peace. Now it meant abandonment. Lena arrived in San Francisco just after dusk. The car stopped in front of a quiet building overlooking the bay. No cameras, no crowds, no display, just clean architecture and private access. Jonathan opened the door for her. "Everything is proceeding as instructed," he said. "The board will finalize overnight." Lena stepped out, feeling the evening air cool against her skin. Inside, the apartment was simple, intentional. Windows open to the water. A table, a chair, space. Jonathan paused before leaving. "There is one thing," he said. Lena turned. "Your grandmother believed collapse reveals truth," he continued. "She wanted you to see it once. Only once." Lena nodded. "I have." Jonathan inclined his head and left. Lena stood alone in the quiet. She didn't toast. She didn't sit immediately. She walked to the window and watched the city lights come on one by one. Controlled, deliberate, necessary. A memory surfaced without pain. Ethan once telling her, "You should be grateful. Not everyone gets chosen." She almost smiled now. Across the bay, Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, jacket still on, phone face down beside him like something dangerous. He finally picked it up, opened his email. Subject line stacked like verdicts. Revised timeline. Strategic pause. Internal review. No anger. No insults. Just removal. Ethan leaned back and stared at the ceiling. For the first time, he understood the difference between being impressive and being indispensable. He had never been the second, and no amount of effort could fix that now. Outside, the city moved on. Inside, Ethan Caldwell realized something worse than losing money. He had lost the right to be believed. And that loss doesn't recover. It only spreads. The collapse didn't announce itself. It arrived quietly, in emails that used careful language and phone calls that ended too quickly. Ethan Caldwell woke the next morning to a silence that felt deliberate. No messages from investors. No congratulations from friends. No reassurance from anyone who used to answer immediately. He sat at the kitchen counter of his apartment, staring at his phone like it might confess something if he waited long enough. It didn't. He opened his laptop. The dashboard for his firm loaded slowly, then refreshed itself into something unfamiliar. Notifications stacked along the side. Compliance checks, access restrictions, review statuses. Nothing accusatory. Nothing emotional. Just procedure. He scrolled, heart tightening. 2 partners had formally withdrawn. 1 advisory board member had stepped aside. A funding round scheduled for the following week was now marked postponed indefinitely. Ethan closed the laptop. This wasn't panic. Panic was loud. This was suffocation. By noon, the first call came from someone who didn't bother pretending. "We're distancing," the voice said. "Nothing personal." Ethan laughed once, hollow. "It feels personal." "That's because you're on the wrong side of it," the man replied, then hung up. Ethan stood, pace stopped. For the first time, he tried to say her name out loud. "Lena." It didn't help. Across the bay, Lena Whitmore moved through her day without urgency. She met with no one. She made no announcements. She drank coffee at the table near the window, sunlight resting across the floor like something earned. Her phone rang once. Jonathan Hale. "It's accelerating," he said. "Exactly as expected." Lena nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "No retaliation?" she asked. "No," Jonathan replied. "Only withdrawal." Withdrawal. That word mattered more than destruction ever could. She ended the call and sat quietly. A memory surfaced, not sharp, just present. Ethan once standing in their living room, frustrated, telling her she was replaceable, that anyone could support him, that she should be grateful to be included. She had believed him then. She knew better now. By evening, Ethan stood inside his firm's office building for the last time. Security hadn't been rude. They hadn't raised voices. They had simply explained that access credentials were being updated, and that it would be easier if he coordinated remotely. Easier. He gathered a few personal items from his desk, nothing meaningful. A framed article. A pen someone had given him years ago. No one stopped him. No one asked questions. As he waited for the elevator, he caught his reflection in the glass. For a moment, he didn't recognize the man staring back. He looked smaller, not physically. Socially, the doors opened. He stepped inside alone. The elevator descended smoothly, efficiently, without ceremony. That night, Lena stood on her balcony overlooking the water. The city lights shimmered, indifferent and endless. She thought about how many years she had tried to be understood by someone who never bothered to look closely. She hadn't won. Winning was loud. She had simply stopped losing. And somewhere across the bay, Ethan Caldwell sat in an apartment that no longer felt like proof of anything, staring at a future that had quietly shut its doors. Not slammed, closed. And that somehow was worse. Weeks passed. No headlines followed Ethan Caldwell's fall. There was no scandal to feed on, no arrest, no lawsuit dramatic enough to trend. Just absence. His firm dissolved quietly. Not officially announced, just unrenewed. Partners drifted. Backers redirected. Meetings stopped being scheduled. His name remained technically intact, but it no longer opened doors. That was the punishment. Ethan tried once to reach Lena. He typed the message, deleted it, typed again. Nothing he wrote survived its own weakness, because there was no version of the past where she owed him an explanation. One afternoon, he sat in a cafe near Mountain View, watching people walk by with purpose. He noticed something unsettling. No one looked at him. He had built his life on being seen. Now he was invisible. Lena Whitmore never issued a statement. She never appeared on magazine covers. She didn't correct rumors or confirm truths. She worked from quiet rooms with quiet people, making decisions that shifted weight instead of noise. Funds moved. Clinics opened. Contracts changed hands. Not as spectacle, as alignment. One evening, Jonathan Hale handed her a slim folder. "Royce Capital has fully dissolved," he said. "No charges. No scandal. Just gone." Lena nodded once. She didn't smile. She walked to the window and watched the city settle into night. Jonathan waited, then spoke again. "Your grandmother used to say something," he said. She believed real power isn't about destroying people. Lena turned slightly. She believed it was about removing the illusion that they were ever untouchable. Lena let that sit. Later that night, alone in her apartment, she cooked a simple meal. She ate slowly, without guilt, without urgency. She caught her reflection in the glass and didn't look away. For the first time, she didn't see someone waiting to be chosen. She saw someone complete. Somewhere else. Ethan called Wells' stereophone that no longer rang. He had learned the truth too late. Power doesn't shout. It doesn't explain. And it doesn't come back once it's withdrawn. Lena Whitmore didn't win because she inherited billions. She won because she survived being underestimated and never needed to prove otherwise. And that was always the part Ethan failed to understand. The quiet ones don't collapse. They wait